There's a lot of openness in the industry right now to experimentation with different service models and product types. And there's one service model that as soon as I heard about it in 2022, I knew it needed to be discussed on this podcast that we would eventually create here at Fresh Cup. Today's guest is Bailey Manson, Director of Innovation at Intelligentsia Coffee. Bailey is the mad scientist behind a bunch of interesting products and experiences at Intelligentsia, but none more shocking than his concept for an espresso bar where all of the espresso is made using instant freeze-dried coffee. Intelligentsia's Illumination Bar, which is located in Pasadena, California, is the experimental playground for the brand that has served this instant espresso product for the last 3 years. In this conversation, we talk about how Bailey and his team convinced themselves to go with an idea so crazy as instant espresso, all the different tools and workflow considerations for serving coffee in this way, how baristas and customers responded to the service style, and why they just recently tore out the freeze-dried service model and replaced it with an innovative but more classic espresso workflow. If you like to keep up with what's going on at the forefront of coffee service innovation, this episode is definitely for you. I'm Garrett Oden from Fresh Cup, and welcome to the Coffee Think Tank. The most innovative coffee businesses I know give themselves the space and energy to nurture a culture of innovation. Unfortunately, space and energy are things that most coffee business owners are short on. That's why I'm excited to introduce you to this season's sponsor, SumUp. SumUp is a point-of-sale company with a powerful suite of tools designed to help coffee businesses master the day-to-day and optimize customer retention so that you can have the flexibility and confidence to explore new opportunities. A full digital POS system, mobile card readers, loyalty and marketing automation, and even self-serve kiosks. Whether you're running a small cafe or a growing roastery, SumUp's tools give you the breathing room to explore innovation in your business. Visit sumup.com to learn more. All right, Bailey, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty, so I first heard about the Illumination Bar in 2022 when there was some coverage around the opening and how you were using instant espresso as opposed to pulling shots with an espresso machine. And I think you were using your standard Black Cat espresso only as the instant, and that was the basis for all your espresso-based drinks. I was really bullish on instant specialty at the time. We just had Sudden Coffee was doing well, Voila was having a good time, and Swift Cup I think was coming around at that time as well. So there was a lot of optimism around instant specialty, but I had not seen anybody doing this in a cafe setting, and it was so fascinating to see that this was happening and that it was Intelligentsia and not some sort of random gonna throw things at the wall type brand that that might have nothing to lose if it were to go south. So I knew I had to get you on the podcast because this is so fascinating, and there's a lot of other things that y'all are doing at the Illumination Bar that are atypical, and I think there's a lot to learn about the kind of experiments y'all are doing.
Yeah, it was a wild idea. It still seems crazy that we did that, but there was a logic to it, and so I'm happy to discuss it.
Well, I want to talk all about Illumination Bar, but I want to start with you because you were the Director of Innovation at Intelligentsia, and that's not a typical role to have at most coffee companies. So I want to hear a little bit about what's a 60-second recap of your coffee career before you found yourself in this innovation role.
Yeah, I started in retail. So I was drinking coffee in college so I could write papers, and then was kind of had a hobby relationship with it. It was like, oh, maybe I should get a job in this and try it, because it was 2010 and it was hard to get jobs. And so did that. And then I was like, hey, I think I want to make a career out of this. And so I moved and tried to get in at a place that had more upward mobility in Telly, and got in at the bottom, basically. I was bar backing, washing dishes, but I needed to make more money because I had all this student loan debt. And so, I look back on my career and I was really in the right place at the right time so many times. I think a lot of it is just being really lucky. I'm really grateful for that. I do think that when opportunities presented themselves, I did bet on myself and say yes, even if I didn't know how I was going to pull it off, and just kept pushing and got here. And, a big part of it has been being in communication with Intelli the whole time and saying I'm thinking about this, I want this, and having a really long game, talking about ideas years in advance in some cases. And so being able to do that together, yeah, I don't know how we pulled it off, but yeah, that's how we got here, basically.
So what was your role directly before you became director of innovation? How did that transition go?
Oh, it was like manager of innovation or something like that. It was just like almost like a test role sort of. So, and I think before that it was like education and service program manager, which was mostly focused on what we were doing in retail with our education program and then just coffee service in general. And so it's just, and then before that was educator. So it's been like a gradual move that way where from retail always being kind of focused on like brewing type stuff and then product stuff. Yeah, is that answering the question?
Yeah. So going from like retail to product development, that's not like the standard, the next rung up the ladder. That's kind of like a horizontal move. How did that happen?
Yeah, that was again a serendipity. So I don't really know how my name came up, but we had been working on developing a coffee concentrate. So we have today a bag and box coffee concentrate, and we sell it to a lot of wholesale accounts. It's what we serve as our cold coffee in our coffee bars. We no longer brew cold brew. We haven't for many years at this point. And that product had just been developed by a number of people who were just doing what they could to piece it together. And then it existed, and it was 100% Yirgacheffe. And people were like, this is not going to work. And so they needed it to become, we needed it to become like an annual, a year-round blend. And so Jeff just called me and was like, hey, here's this problem. Everyone is so busy. Do you think, and I was still an educator in Venice, so like, could you do this? Could you turn this bib into a year-round blend? And that's a good example of me saying, yeah, totally. And I have no idea how I'm going to do this, but I'm just saying yes. Yeah. That was my first product development project. Yeah.
Who's Jeff? If the
Jeff
listener
Watts,
doesn't know.
who was like, synonymous with Intelligentsia, the one who conceived of direct trade. I had the, again, fortunate opportunity to be largely trained by Jeff when it comes to sensory work. He was based in LA at the time when I was an educator, and I got to work with him every Friday for years. That's an amazing thing. Jeff's trained cuppers all around the world, so there's a lot of us that get to say that he trained us, but it is an amazing opportunity to have had, for sure.
It's great. So how long were you in an innovation and product development role before the idea for the Illumination Bar came up?
Oh man, so I think I finally was no longer based in a retail location middle of 2017, and then Illumination Bar was a 2020 idea.
2020
Yeah, so about 3
idea.
years.
Where'd this idea come from? Because you just do so much here. That's off the wall. So, how did you get this started?
Yeah, so a couple of things lined up, which was COVID, and that gutted us, right? So like Intelligentsia doesn't get PPP. We gotta do other things to stay alive. And I don't even understand what we did and how we did it. Amazing kudos to our CFO and CEO and how they managed it. Definitely there were a lot of sad things that happened as well with people getting laid off, and nobody feels good about any of that, but we did survive. And so that was happening, and it was just like, what is the future of retail? Nobody knew anything at the time. And simultaneously, the lease was up on that space, and we were in the process of renegotiating. And so there were just more question marks than ever. The credit really goes to our CEO, I would say, James. He was like, if we're gonna re-up this lease, we have to do something different. Like, I'm not going to sign this for us to open another status quo coffee bar that just looks like the rest of them. You need to go and come up with an idea and come back to me. So I went and we came up with a few ideas and service models, essentially. One of them was a super auto concept, because I am a fan of the Eversys machines, and I thought there was a way that we could pull it off. And, for Intelligentsia at the time, he was like borderline offended at that proposal. And was like, you need to try again. And so I was like, I have this other idea. I think it's insane, but I think it can work. So I put a little work into it, and I was like, I think we could serve freeze-dried coffee. And that's when people are like, what? You think we could what? And I was like, I think this is how it could work. And I showed this is the way we get this equipment, this is the process for how you actually make it. I was shooting video in the lab of this is the process, and like this is the time from the time somebody says, can I get a latte, till the drink hits the counter? Like, does this work? Like, what's the cost look like? I think everybody was just like, this is so wild, and it's not remotely status quo. And what you're showing us as far as it working, like it does appear to work. So, all right, we're doing it.
Let me just make sure I know what this sort of the initial concept was. You have instant, freeze-dried black cat espresso. That is the basis for all espresso drinks. But you still have like other filter coffees that are, ground from whole bean, and your concentrate products and the tea and the rest of the whole 9 yards. Is that right?
Yeah, and we weren't really sure what it was going to look like. So the original name of the project was Instant Trait, because we weren't sure if it was going to be freeze-dried or if it was going to be concentrate. We weren't sure that it was going to be all espresso or all coffee in general. Included in the instant trait concept was even commandeer. It was like, should this be frozen? Like, there were so many, everything was on the table. So, but yeah, eventually it did whittle down to, all right, it's going to be freeze-dried black cat. We did eventually also add freeze-dried decaf for decaf espresso drinks. But we opened with a ground control. Yeah, for filter coffee.
So ground control for filter, making it by the cup or making concentrates?
We did both. We were making air quotes, normal batch brew. There's nothing normal about a ground control. And then we did have a concentrate recipe as well, because we had other ideas for things we could do with concentrates. And we did have concentrates when we opened as well. We're no longer brewing concentrates. I double checked on that a couple of days ago, but it's not that we couldn't. It's just that offering kind of moved away.
Okay, so you present this big plan to the team. Is this something that takes like months to go over all the data and do the spreadsheets and say yes, or is this something that happened pretty quick?
So from my perspective, in hindsight, it happened very quick because it was in COVID, because there was this lease renewal. Part of the negotiation included like some work in the construction. Like we used to be in the basement of that space also, for example. Like when Pasadena opened, it had a restaurant as well. So the downstairs is a full kitchen. And we haven't had the restaurant in a long time, but we wanted to move out of that space and just be in the upstairs. So that box that's up there, we built that, we closed in the stairs. So like a lot of it needed to happen with that lease renewal, which was fast. And also, like, it's COVID, we're in the middle of like reopening stuff. And so it was just like, we need to get reopened, like ASAP. Like we're just, everyone who's closed is hemorrhaging. Or even if you're just doing window service, which we did some window service out of Pasadena for a while. We had these huge roll up windows in the front. Like that was something, but it wasn't much. Colorado, like that road there in Old Town Pasadena got hit really hard.
Is this something that, you were just sweating hardcore over because you're pitching this wild idea and you don't know if it's going to work and nobody's tried it before? Or, is this something where you feel pretty confident that this is like, you'll get the team buy-in and you'll all accept the experiment together?
No, there were two elements to that. So one is that we quickly learned and increasingly gained understanding through collaborating with Swift that the freezer coffee is extremely hygroscopic. So that was a big problem that we needed to solve for. And that was extremely stressful to me. I knew that August in LA can get humid. And how do I know that this coffee isn't going to turn to a brick and we can't serve anything? Because it just wants to absorb moisture so bad. You're in a coffee bar. It's a wet place. You're dumping out hot water all the time. It's just in the air. You're steaming things. You're purging steam wands. You're putting moisture in the immediate vicinity of this product. So I was very nervous because I thought there's a non-zero chance this like is not possible to do. Then the other part was, well, what about like, are people gonna buy it? Like that's, this is a business. That was the other concern. And I think we quickly focused really, really quickly. We said, our peers are going to drag us through the mud for doing this, and we need to not worry about that. We need to focus on our regulars. The people that come here 5 days a week, we need to work with them, and we need to convince them, and we need to show them what we see. And that's really what matters, because that's who's in here every day. And we put a lot of work into that, and we increasingly felt more and more optimistic about our ability to do that because we felt like it's just in the cup. Like when people taste it, they see it pretty quickly. And so we were optimistic about that part.
Why only espresso and not for filter coffee?
We thought that the difference was too big. So if you're doing a freeze-dried latte next to a fresh brewed latte, in most instances, I would suggest that the freeze-dried latte is better. And this comes down to like Intelligentsia having like this siloed set of values. Like we have our own cupping sheet. We don't use the SCA cupping form, for example. We have our own set of like, this is what our vision of coffee quality is like, and we want this to be in the cup and we don't want this to be in the cup, and this is going to be there no matter what. And so bitterness, for example, is something that I think in general the industry doesn't really reward, but it's a largely inherent part of coffee. It is certainly an inherent part of Black Cat traditional fresh pulled espresso, and it's not really a part of the freeze-dried version of it. So we're taking the same exact coffee. And really the way we talked about this is that we were crediting Swift largely. And this is, again, part of why we went to Swift to see and get a better understanding too. It's like, this whole coffee bar is going to be reliant on this other business. If Swift closes its doors for some unknown reason, like now we're screwed. So we visited them, gained a lot of confidence in them. They're amazing. And so we saw how they brew. And I'd known like, man, they must be brewing well. And then when I saw how they brewed, I was like, oh yeah, this is it. Like their brewing is so good that when they eventually go through freeze drying, that like, that's why you have all these really good flavors, because they're getting them in the initial extraction. And largely they're leaving this bitterness behind. Bitterness is not something that we're rewarding. And so if this latte is less bitter than this one, like I like it more.
Is that something where you can share what made their process different or why it works so well, or is that sort of like a trade secret?
No, I will err on the conservative side of not talking about anything that Swift does. We were the first guests in that building and definitely want to respect them there. There's even one part, I remember there was one thing that like they wouldn't even show us or talk to us about. And, they do an amazing job and I wouldn't want to. Yeah.
Props to Swift Cup. We buy their coffee when we're traveling, especially around the holidays. It's just easier to take that than the whole get up. So yeah, props to them.
Yeah. And then, sorry to fully answer your question. Then when we would do side by sides with the filter coffee, it's just not the same. And so like, is it great when you're traveling? Yes. Is it great when you're in a pinch? Yes. Is it the same? No. And Swift would say the same thing. Like there's just an inherent loss in volatiles. There's the acidity doesn't come through the same. That's just part of how freeze drying works. What you get from them is as good as it gets. Like it doesn't really get better, but there's just those couple things, which is like acidity and volatile aromatics that are highly valued and extremely relevant in a filtered coffee. And that's why we were like, okay, I think we got to keep this fresh brewed.
What about espresso then? If somebody just comes and orders an espresso, are you worried about that?
Yeah, we were super worried about it. That was extremely stressful. So we knew from the sales data that 14 people a day were going to order espresso. And that was the thing we poured the most into. That was the thing we stressed out about the most. And so then we did a lot of training on it. We did a lot of mock, like just in a completely different setting. Somebody would just pretend to be the guest and like, do devil's advocate kind of pushing and role playing to like, how are we going to have these conversations? And what we were shocked by is just like the level of curiosity. I still to this day don't really understand it. I mean, like I had a little bit of an idea. So like we did do you remember the La Marzocco KEXP pop-up bar that changed in Seattle every month? They had this, La Marzocco had this
that's
cafe,
right.
And every month there was like a new installation. And I was a part of that. That was another thing I did in my journey. And that's where I learned like, wait a second, I think that guests, regulars are way more resilient and way less sensitive to change than the industry thinks they are. That's what that place taught me. And this was where we really saw that happening is people would order espresso and we would say, we had to be upfront. We were not just going to serve you a cup of diluted freeze-dried coffee. And so we told them, explained what we were doing. If you came in and said, can I get a latte? We just said yes and made the latte. But if you said espresso, we're going to explain what's happening here because we want no surprises on that. Like that's just a different scenario. And almost all the time people said, well, I mean, can I try it? I want to try it. A couple people were like, oh, that's good. Like they were surprised. Nobody was really upset. I never once heard a story where somebody was really upset. And a number of people were like, oh, okay, like never mind then. I'll just get like a filter coffee instead, or I'll just get a latte instead. So sometimes people change their order. Sometimes people actually enjoyed it. And sometimes I would say maybe some other percentage of time people tried it but didn't really enjoy it. So maybe they're not ordering again. So there was definitely a hiccup there for sure.
Let's talk about the gear, the workflow. I'm sure this is a totally different process. So, what kinds of tools or systems did you have to make this work?
Yeah, so we were wondering how we were going to dose the coffee. One of my earliest ideas was wondering if we could make like tablets like out of it. And that was weird. I went to weird places on the internet where I was like, oh, this is how people make drugs at home. This is weird. Like, and I also then realized that it doesn't really work very well. And so we were trying to find, can we dose the powder as is? And we found a powder doser. We had to order it from Singapore. I talked to them and I was like, hey, this is our idea. What do you think? And they were like, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea. We have, they make it for pharmaceuticals as like their primary customer, but they were like, yeah, we have people that use it for cosmetics when they're like manufacturing and they need to just like dose this powder for this thing. Or they had somebody who used it for like an edible glitter and like a liqueur when they were dosing. So like using it for food, for consumables was not new to them. We were definitely concerned about like getting approval from the city because it's not NSF. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, they flagged it on our submissions and they were like, what is this? What are you doing? And we had planned ahead. And so what we had done is we got a list of all of the food contact materials in the doser. And then I showed the city that these were all on the FDA's list of approved food contact materials. And they were like, all right, cool. And they just immediately stamped it. So the powder doser, then we used a Curtis Corinth because we needed the water element. And so you just get your powder, boom, get your water. And then we needed to get this dissolved. And we had a few different options. We were trying to think, could we use I'm looking at all this lab equipment, basically. What of this lab equipment can you use? There's lots of ways that things are mixed in the lab, that solutions are made. And ultimately we landed on a stir plate. So I was able to find this stir plate that's fully stainless and designed to be submersible. So when people need to mix things like in a hot water bath, and I was like, this is it, because this is not going to break. And it also was not mechanical, it was magnetic driven. So it was like, great, this is not going to, how they're going to be breaking. And I think for most of the couple years that we were doing this, that stir plate did not turn off. Like the baristas didn't turn it off at night. It was running 24/7, 365. And it's just through the magnetism that without those moving parts, like it was really resilient. And then we needed to figure out how are we going to dose these stir bars into the beakers on the stir plate to do the dosing? Because now do I just pick it up with my fingers? There with COVID, there's a lot of this germophobia kind of increasing. And, there's already this movement in coffee where people are trying to move away from stock flex, for example. So we found a way that we get these little stainless cups that hold the stir bars, throw that in the beaker. Now it's stirring and you're essentially ghost writing the shot at that point. It's just making itself now. And then the question is, well, how do you get that stir bar out? You do not want to accidentally pour that stir bar into someone's latte and then have them swallow a magnet. That's really bad. We needed to figure out how to get that out of there. And I had this, again, sort of Rube Goldberg idea, I think this will work. And it was basically, we built this stainless stand with a T on it, a little arm off the top. And we put super powerful magnets off the top of that. They're PTFE coated. So that's what all stir bars are coated in, all food safe, inert. And basically what you do is you pick up the beaker off the stir plate, hold it underneath this T stand with the powerful magnets on it, and it just is strong enough that it just rips the magnet up out of the beaker and grabs it at the top. So you're just sort of doing a drive-by. You pick up the beaker, pass it by that magnet, it pulls it out of it, and then you can pour it into the ceramic or the paper cup.
When you say beaker, I'm thinking of like a little vial, like a little ceramic vial. Is that it? Is
Yeah,
that
and
what we're
that
talking
was
about?
part of it. It was like, what type of glassware are we going to use here? What shape? And so we did start with just like more cylindrical type beakers. We did start with glass. Those proved to be too fragile for the real world, and we eventually did switch to plastic beakers. But yeah, we were for a little while like, should this be more like an Erlenmeyer shape? And should it be like an oscillating table that mixes instead of a stir plate? And should it be a vortex machine? There were so many ideas for how to do it and what it was going to mix in. But yeah, just a normal standard beaker.
So what's the time to make a shot like this? Like how many seconds?
So powder dosing was like 2 or 3 seconds. So about the time it takes for you to grind your coffee is like how long it would take us to dose the powder. Water is similar, like a couple seconds. And the Corinth was amazing. It was the machine for it because you have these different programs you can do on these 3 buttons. And it was amazingly consistent and down to very small doses. So a lot of hot water dosers in coffee will not allow you to have such a small dose or to adjust the dosing in such small increments. If I recall correctly, it was like 1 or 2 tenths of an ounce was the increment that it would dose in. So we were pretty much able to get 40, 42 grams of water all the time. Very easy. Once you start stirring, it's mixed in like 10 seconds, less, 5 seconds. So it was always mixing for longer than we needed to because now we're going to go do milk for the most part. And so the shot's just like going longer than it needs to because it's waiting for milk.
Okay. Yeah. Talk about milk. What happens next?
Yeah, so milk was a big question because in coffee, all of our machines, the milk and espresso are married together. So we spent a long time. Do we want the Astra steamer? Is there another steamer that we can get somewhere? What do we want to do here? We talked a lot about just the manual versus like an automated capability. And then we learned about the Wally and I was like, I'll buy one now. Like Mike Lanz, who like runs sales for Lawnmower Zuko USA, actually is a customer of Intelli Pasadena. And so I'm used to seeing him. I've known him for a long time. And so it was like, when I heard about that, I was like, we're ready. Like, I'll take one. And we had some delays. They had some delays, and it just perfectly worked out. We bought the first 2 Wallies in the US, and that's what we did our milk on. And so we were finally able to get a machine that was freestanding that only did milk. You know, there were other machines like a Perfect Moose or something like that. I forget, I'm blanking on some of the other machines, but like they were only available in Australia or Europe, and we just don't have them in the US. We were super behind on that stuff. And so Wally is what we did, 1 steam bar module and steam mod bar module, and then 2 Wallies above counter. And that was interesting. We learned that through consistency, like we really wanted to weigh the milk. So there's a little scale on the bar, pitcher goes on, weigh the milk, throw it on there, let it do its thing. And so steaming was hands off, making the shot was largely hands off, and it introduced some more free time for the barista to be able to, start on the next drink. And the stir plate also had, I can't remember if it was like 4 or 6 stations. And so you could be making 6 shots at a time. You could be steaming 2 milks at a time. And then there's also your ice drinks that don't need steam milk. So you could be doing a lot of drinks at once. And then we did choose to manually pour latte art. There was a minute where it was like, well, do we just dump the shot into the milk? And, do we just dose the powder into the pitcher, pour the milk on top, and let the Wally mix it and heat it and give up latte art? Like, there were a lot of things that were up for consideration. We eventually, at the last minute, like it was like probably 3 days before we opened when we were doing barista training, that we made the final call to like keep latte art.
Can you describe what the Wally looks like and what it does for people who might not know?
Yeah, wow. I don't know if I can, but I will try. So Wally is it's got like a little tray that you set the pitcher on. It's probably like, 6-7 inches wide and deep. And the tray actually tilts. So you put the milk pitcher in it. It like has this little corner that it registers in. And then there's a steam wand that actually lowers into the pitcher. And then the tray that the milk pitcher sits on actually tilts. So that's how you get your angle. And then it has like a little screen and a dial, and we just wrote recipes. So basically it's like, give me this temperature, give me this much aeration. And it would manage the aeration by like the wand moving up and down. and it uses like infrared to measure the temperature. And yeah, so baristas would just, select, latte, cappuccino, whatever. And we had a little recipe essentially where it was like, this drink gets this many grams or ounces of milk in the pitcher so that the Wally can steam it to the same temperature and foam expansion every single time.
So if I'm a customer and I walk into the Illumination Bar and I order a drink, I'm not looking at a big espresso machine that you're behind. I'm looking at some like lab equipment, and some things are being stirred magnetically, and the magnet's being ripped out of the beaker by a giant magnet. I mean, this sounds like a pretty wild experience if you're on the customer side.
Yeah, well, I think that's what I thought. To me, what really stood out to me is the sound, actually, because you don't hear purging steam wands like you do. Like the Wally's a little different. You don't hear pucks getting knocked out. You don't hear the portafilter slamming into the bayonet ring. You don't hear the espresso grinder running. The powder doser is really quiet and a different pitch. So to me, the sound was the thing that was most jarring. Like, this place sounds different. And from a visibility standpoint, when you walk up to that front bar, it's really just like a pastry case and then a register person with like, normal register, like, impulse purchase, merchandise, granola bar kind of things there. And so you're not really engaging straight away with the machine anyways. And then people order, and then they kind of go to hand off, and then they're on their phone. Most people didn't notice. And that sounds crazy to consider. What do you mean they didn't know? They didn't know. Didn't notice. I remember having, in the first week, because I lived nearby, I was there every day for 3 months, or every 5 days a week for 3 months. I remember having a conversation with some ladies, and they were really excited that we were reopened and the coffee was tasting great. And like they loved the space. Was beautiful. It's totally different. It's very bright and used to be very dark, things like that. And we did get into the conversation about the instant, and they were like, wow, that's so cool. I'm so curious about that. And it dawned on me, like they didn't realize that the latte they were drinking was made that way. And I told them, and they were just like, what? No. And they go back to take another sip, like they missed something. And they were like, that's crazy. It's so good. And so it was just kind of shocking how much people didn't notice.
The sound comment, that's really interesting. Because when I'm in a busy cafe, there's all these sounds, and it sounds like craft and work and, like motion. But it sounds like what you're describing sounds like a lot more elegant. I don't know, quiet, peaceful, maybe? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I think so. When I was an educator, that was a really big value to me. It was like I didn't want people yelling out names or yelling out drinks. I don't want to yell in here. Even the pucks, it was like if we can flick the puck out of the portafilter, let's do it. Let's use the bar if we have to. Things like that. Like, people aren't necessarily here to like hear all this slamming. Like, let's try to create a space that's like a little more peaceful for people. So even in Venice, I was trying to foster something like that. And in Pasadena, it was, a way more exaggerated, different version of that.
That's really interesting. You have other things that you've got going on that I've heard you mention. You've got like the Flare 58, the X Bloom, AeroPress. You've got some other things going on. Are these all happening at the same time, or are you kind of layering on these other ways of working?
Yeah, so first we just like needed to get our feet underneath us. Like I said, number one priority was our regulars. Get them on board. Are they with us on this? Are we out of our element? Do we need to pivot? Are we crazy and we need an espresso machine on this counter immediately? Some of the other offerings, like with the concentrates we were doing on the ground control, that was like a little more chaotic than we thought it might be. Just trying to figure out that offering back then. And then it was eventually like, finally the team was like, okay, what next? Because we told them, like, this is going to be a playground where we try new ideas. And so we started introducing things gradually. And I think it's kind of up to you which ones we want to get into, because I very easily can go down the rabbit hole and get in the weeds. But yeah, we added an AeroPress offering that unlocked brew to order iced for us. It unlocked like every coffee in the building at any time offering. I was super excited about modern espresso and using the Flare 58 to do profiles, and so we put that in. We also offered any coffee at any time on that. Some things have changed, like I said, we're not doing the concentrates, but we're also not doing AeroPress there anymore, and we've got the X Bloom in there now. I mean, to give away the ending, like we also don't have the freeze dried in there either anymore. Like, that's been pulled and iterated as well. So yeah, I'm not sure where you want to go with some of these.
Yeah, let's keep talking about freeze dried for a little bit here. So, you know, there's some point probably where you start to think this isn't quite what we thought, or maybe this doesn't have the longevity that we suspected it might. I don't know. When did you start to see the cracks that maybe this wasn't going to be the long-term solution?
I don't know. I think that's a hard question to answer, actually, because there was always some acknowledged reservation from the beginning, right? It was just like from the beginning, we didn't necessarily think like, oh, this is wildly scalable. This is going to be the future. Everyone's going to be doing it. But I didn't really say that from the beginning. Some people even, I can think of one person in mind who even thought like that almost certainly it would have an end, that like it was going to end one day and we would just move on to the next thing. And so I think it was always on our minds, like, how is it going? But eventually it was like, we pull reviews and we look at, hey, how are reviews doing? And when we started to see a lot of customer reviews that were just like the people that did notice and they did not like it, and they were making it very clear that they value bespoke espresso, that hearing that from a lot of people in writing, we needed to do our job and listen to them and respond. So I think it was when we finally like saw, and we had like a PDF of like a collection of these reviews. It was like, this is not like one disgruntled person. Like I said, like it was really, really well received in the beginning, but the few people that were upset gradually increased in number as time went on. And in Pasadena on that street, there's no shortage of places you can go instead.
Is this feedback that's like aggressively, this is not what I wanted? Or, are people saying, I get the experiment, but I would move on?
I don't think that people thought of acknowledged the experimental factor of it. I don't remember that if they did, but it was more like, this is not what I want. This is not like why I'm going to a specialty cafe. It's not why I'm going to Intelligentsia. Yeah.
That's so, I've heard you say the taste of this is better if you have a latte and it's side by side, but people are saying this is not what I go for. How do you make sense of that? What's the difference there?
Well, I think part of it is that sensory is really complicated and expectation bias is massively powerful. And so if you see somebody push a button, get a powder, add some water, make a drink with it, and you think, what the heck is that? It's probably going to taste bad. If you see somebody grinding this fresh beans, you smell the aroma, then you see this strategic tamping intentionality, you see the espresso trickling down, you see this beautiful coloring, and you see the latte, all these things, and you're like, man, I've been waiting for this. I can't make this at home. They don't make it like this down the street. And then you taste it, that's probably gonna be amazing. So sensory is just complicated. And also, a big factor too was I can do that. And I resonate with that a lot. I have a hard time going to restaurants where I'm like, I can make this food. And so when people are like, I can mix freeze-dried coffee, then why am I paying you to do that? Whereas they're like, I can't make espresso like you can, fresh.
Yeah. That resonates. I often will do espresso-based when I go to a coffee shop, or get a really nice coffee that I don't have at home.
Right.
I'm not typically getting drip because that's what I do every day at the house. Yeah, that's interesting. Does that mean if you're a restaurant and your coffee gets made in the back, should you be doing freeze dried because it's simpler in a lot of ways, and people won't know, or it might not have that sort of expectation that conflict for them?
Ooh, I'm not gonna should on anybody, but I think it would be helpful to consider it. We made it available to wholesale accounts. There was some adoption, but extremely little. And it's hard to say why. I think for some people, it's just instant. No. I think there's a small subset of specialty coffee people that are aware of somebody like Swift that's oh no, it can be good. But the greater food world is still what, instant? No. So I think it's been a harder sell. And and if the answer is just no on its face, then you don't even get to the point of tasting.
What about costs? I think you wrote somewhere that this is a more expensive process, and of course you have to go through a partner, Swift and you're not just having the roasted coffee and working from that. So how did that affect your costs? And was it more expensive on the customer side?
Yeah, not more expensive on the customer side. We have pricing models for our retail locations. I don't really fully understand them. I'm not really involved in that, but I think we have like a couple tiers if I recall correctly, or maybe it's all in one now, but no, it wasn't higher for them, but the COGS were a lot higher, a lot higher. And I don't need to get specific, but that mattered a lot. And you felt it a lot. In the original model building, when had the idea was that the throughput would be so high that it offset the additional COGS with labor, essentially. So, like in a cafe, it's like, okay, maybe we can have one person open or two people open, and then they can handle this much volume until the next person needs to come in. And then they can handle this much volume until the next person needs to come in. And the model showed that like the threshold for where the next person needs to come in was just higher. So that was supposed to be what made it work. And it's just not really clear that ever was true in hindsight. Yeah, like I think in general, it's like, oh, you're always, as like a responsible business, you're always paying attention to your COGS and like looking for ways to improve things. But that was never the thing that was like going to kill it. Like we were signed up for that from the beginning. We knew what the margin was going to be, and we signed up for it. It was ultimately like the people who live in the neighborhood and want to come in, and they're saying like, for me, that's who we were ultimately listening to when it came down to it.
Yeah. What about for baristas? Was this something that they liked? Was it, hard to get onboarded for this new way of service?
Ooh, so that was a really big question too, was like, what's going to happen here? Like you're revoking this like opportunity for a perceived sense of craftsmanship, and was concerning. We talked a lot about putting energy into like dialing in filter coffee and curating that, being informed about coffees, being able to engage in coffee conversation and like whole bean conversation as well. And that went pretty okay, but there was a point at where it's like, okay, we need a little bit more. And that's where introducing like the brew to order offerings, which the AirPress was the original one, and then eventually the Flare 58. Once we added those, like the engagement for staff went way up. I think it was just, there was a lot more to be engaged with, and curating for guests with intentionality and like a personal opinion. Also, like there were people, like I can think of one person who was just like, I'm done with this, and they quit. Like it was not engaging enough. But for the most part, and the way that coffee bar is today, like that team is amazing. They are so adaptable, so interested, and they're the ones that come and say like, what's the next thing? Like what's next? Because there was a lull for a little while where we hadn't introduced anything new, and it was like we needed to do something. And so that's been really interesting. And I've been there a couple times to like introduce a new offering, and people are excited. And what I also love about it too is that like I'm from an era in Intelli where it was like you only drink black coffee, and you like, other drinks are kind of frowned upon or poo-pooed. But one thing I also love about this current staff is that like they're totally down to happily drink an iced vanilla latte, and then they can also dial in filter coffee and talk about all the nuance in the what they're tasting in the cup, and manipulate dial-ins and at a high level. And that didn't really exist. Like there was an insecurity in specialty coffee, I think, in the past, where if you liked a nice vanilla latte, you couldn't admit that, and it was frowned upon. And now I just think this staff is just like so much more confident. And this is, I think, also just like part of food service and coffee changing post-COVID. I think more space for people to feel confident in what they actually like, own it, and then still be skilled at these other parts of the job that we really value. And I just am like really excited about them. I'm really happy whenever I get to go there. And yeah, they're great.
So let's see, you've taken out the whole workflow, correct? This doesn't exist anymore in this coffee location.
Yeah,
when did that
right.
happen?
Pretty recently. That was, I think, January. Yeah.
Gotcha.
January.
Okay. And so you're back to an espresso machine, a grinder, the more typical setup. Is that right?
Yeah. And it was like, well, then what? How is this? So when we were proposing, hey, we think we should go to this thing, folks, other stakeholders in the company are like, well, does that mean you're giving up the Illumination Bar aspect of this? Like I'm not signing off on this if you're just going back to the status quo, violating the original idea of this concept. And so we needed to like make sure that we weren't doing that. So we have a Swan in there, which is still pretty rare. And that grinder's pretty unique, the way it works and what it can do. We have it at 100 RPMs, the slow setting. It produces the fluffiest coffee that I've seen. We have a puck press, which is great, good for baristas, and a KB90, also good for baristas. Scales, so we can do mass mode. We are pulling turbos in there. So this is our first coffee bar that's pulling fast espresso for guests. They have been pulling fast espresso on the Flare 58 all along, but that's like a manual modular profile. And this is, not, it's a La Marzocco, doesn't have flow profiling. And I prefer flow profiling over pressure profiling. And so there's that. And then part of what's allowing that is we're also using a slightly more modern basket as well. So we use the Flare HU basket, high uniformity. And yeah, so the espresso's different for sure. So it's, we didn't fully go back to a normal trad shot.
Gotcha. I really like the puck press and the KB90, the way you can insert the portafilter. I had a lot of wrist pain when I was behind bar, and the doctor told me I've got sharp wrist bones, or like bones going up my arm that it would irritate my wrist. And when I saw that in 2019, I think at Expo, I was like, this would have kept me working behind bar longer. So I really appreciate that. Okay, so what's the takeaway here? This went on for a few years. Is this, where does this kind of instant service set, like where does this belong? Do you see a role in this in other settings that maybe just not this one?
I think that the thing about freeze-dried coffee is that it's about convenience. So when you're saying where does this belong, I think you're looking for problems where you need a more convenient solution. And so I think that probably the biggest opportunity is going to be for decaf for people, because a lot of places need to have decaf because it matters. You get enough guests that require it, but it's hard to allocate an entire grinder to it. And that spend, that space, everyone wants more space in their space. And to say, like, I have this grinder permanently on the counter and I use it this many times a day, like often the case is not strong. So I do think there's a huge opportunity for decaf freeze-dried coffee to be more common. We certainly use that in a lot of events where it's like, okay, we want to be able to, when somebody says, oh, but can I get decaf? Especially if it's like the event is in the afternoon, we don't like to have to say no to them. And decaf is a great way to do that. And then I think just in general, again, like the little single serve opportunities for travel and other convenient scenarios where you just need it really quickly. We also do sell it to wholesale partners as ingredient. There are things that other people make with freeze-dried coffee as an ingredient that are just, it's the best solution, and it's pretty expensive. That can be certainly prohibitive, but that's another way, is like getting coffee into other things with it. Yeah. But I mean, are we going to see more coffee bars where the flagship offering is freeze-dried? I think probably not. And again, that's largely like if your customer base values the bespoke quality of espresso, it's going to be hard. And if you're in a remotely humid environment where you have to worry about the hygroscopic quality of instant, like that's also going to be a barrier.
So you see a lot in terms of new products that are coming out, new ways people are serving guests in your role. Where do you see specialty coffee going? Given the coffee price roller coaster, and consumer preferences are for all sorts of wacky things, and there's so much diversity now in what people are looking for. I don't know. I'm curious. What do you see happening, and what sticks out to you?
Oh, well, we have lots of ideas, and I see lots of things happening. I would be hesitant to put money on much. I think especially when like you're saying with coffee prices and the economy and the uncertainty that I think a lot of people are feeling right now, it makes it even harder to place bets. But some things that we do see in our own sales data, for example, is the growth of cold, right? So cold is just like so popular and growing. And we have one coffee bar specifically where it already has eclipsed hot, where it is more than 50% of the drinks we sell year round are cold, and the others are trending that way. And the signature drinks. So we didn't have them for so long. I want to say that our first like real signature drink offerings in like the, I don't know, Intelligentsia, I don't know. We had some back in the aughts, but we didn't really do much in the teens, but we are like around the turn there, like what people think of as like when Intelligentsia was competing. We didn't do many. And so we started gradually in the mid-teens, probably 2015 or something like that. And right now, it just seems like the more we add to the menu, the more people want. And we've tried to do a better job of like getting more creative and engaging more with trends and things like that. You know, we're not going to do what Starbucks did and release too many, every week or something like that. But we're on like basically a quarterly pace, and we release anywhere between like 2 to 5 drinks at a time. And it's been big. And so we're leaning more into that, and cold is a big part of that. And then I think we're all trying to understand service models. Like we're seeing Starbucks and a lot of food places, restaurants, like shifting people to mobile orders and drive-throughs. And we're curious about that. We also see, places reverting and trying to get people to be back inside and sitting down and ordering in ceramic. So I think right now the industry is just a little bit confused, and we're all just kind of open to everything, and we're trying to push all of it, and we're just trying to be ready for whatever catches. And we have our perspective and what we value. We're always going to be pushing our single origin coffees, filter coffee. We're trying to promote that, where I'm in the middle of a project right now trying to revise that, and that's what we're most excited about usually, and that's what our coffee team is most excited about usually. And so we're always going to have our values and things that we want to push, but customers or guests are a little bit unpredictable in a lot of ways right now, and we're trying to just meet people. I think Intelli has been on like a pretty wild journey of being the first in a lot of instances and having rubbed people the wrong way, many years ago. And as competition grew and you could get specialty coffee on every block, people got nicer, and we've been on our journey to get nicer and more friendly and more approachable. And we really focus on that every day, all day long. Like that's our thing, is leaving that 10-year-old reputation behind and just trying to be a very welcoming place for people, whether that's, ordering via e-com and getting whole bean into your kitchen, or coming into our cafes and engaging with our baristas. Like that's kind of what we're also focused on.
What about you personally? Are there any fun projects that you're working on or things you're excited about?
Yeah, for sure. The signature drinks are a big lift for me, so I do spend a lot of time on that. I have a couple other things that I'm working on, one that I'll keep, and then we have like some RTDs that are coming back. So we have our black is out now, our lattes are running a trial tomorrow, so those will be out again soon. And then we got a new coffee bar coming, so that's exciting. We don't open a new coffee bar all the time. It's been a while since we opened our last one. That's been a major project for me, and it's going to be very different. It'll be more different than any other coffee bar we have. And so, we've also, if we had this expansion in Seoul over the last year, so there's coffee bars over there now, and it's just been wild. So yeah, there's a lot in the pipeline always.
Lots going on. Well, Bailey, this has been a phenomenal conversation. You're sort of fulfilling my dream here of wanting to talk to you ever since I first heard the news about Illumination Bar. So thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited for all the guests that you're going to be having on.
Well, where can people follow the work that you're doing or new things y'all are experimenting with?
Yeah, I generally stay off the social media stuff, but you can follow Intelligentsia, and they're posting about things off and on. So yeah, we got a new person on the team who's been managing that recently, and they've been doing a really good job. So excited about what they're posting there.
Awesome. Well, we'll have you back someday when you've got some new wacky experiments to deep dive again.
That sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Bailey.
Thanks.
Yeah.